If you're watching for the first time, make sure to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you even more incredible stories. It all started on a completely ordinary afternoon, the kind that feels like nothing out of the usual, the kind where you expect the day to pass quietly. I had just returned from the gym, muscles aching, sweat sticking to my skin, desperate for a hot shower. The house felt quieter than usual, almost eerily so. I noticed immediately that neither my mom nor my sister was around. A small pang of loneliness hit me. Not unusual, really. Since my dad passed away 5 years ago, the house had been quieter, emptier, like a shadow of the bustling home it once was. I'd grown used to the silence, learned to live with it. So, shrugging it off, I dropped my gym bag in the living room and headed to the bathroom. The water was blissfully hot, washing away the sweat, tension, and fatigue. I stayed in the shower longer than usual, letting my mind drift, savoring the peace that felt so rare in these rooms. I wasn't in a rush. I had the entire afternoon to myself. Or so I thought. Little did I know, the quiet I was enjoying was about to be shattered. Stepping out, towel wrapped around me, I thought the house would still be empty. But when I walked back into the living room, I froze. There were my mom and sister sitting quietly on the couch. My stomach sank as the realization hit me. I had assumed they were out, and yet here they were, witnessing the chaos of my unplanned absence of awareness. The awkwardness of the moment was instant and intense. Heart pounding, I scrambled to collect my clothes, my mind racing with panic and embarrassment. I rushed to my room, slammed the door behind me, and leaned against it, trying to calm my racing heart. I felt foolish, exposed, not physically, but emotionally. Sometimes it's not just what people see, it's the feeling of being unprepared, of losing control for a split second that lingers. Over the next week, I convinced myself that everything had returned to normal. Maybe they had forgotten. Maybe they'd moved on, I told myself. But life has a way of leaving little reminders. The way my sister looked at me, the subtle changes in her behavior, the slight tension in the air, it was all there, unspoken, but unmistakable. I couldn't shake it. One evening, I was in my room trying to escape into the virtual world of a video game, the clattering of buttons, the rush of action on the screen. It was a temporary refuge. I thought I could push the awkwardness aside, let it fade into memory. But then the door creaked open and my sister stepped in, a mischievous grin on her face. For a moment, I relaxed. Maybe this would be normal like old times. We joked, laughed, and teased each other like we always did. But there was something different. A subtle tension underlined our interactions. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or if the memory of that day had shifted something unspoken between us. I felt myself growing self-conscious, acutely aware of every gesture, every word. The comfort of our usual sibling banter now carried a faint edge. I tried to focus on my game, losing myself in the digital world, but the underlying tension was impossible to ignore. Every laugh, every glance seemed loaded with a silent question I couldn't answer. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn between us that day, one we hadn't acknowledged but both felt. I wondered if I should bring it up, confront it, or simply pretend it never happened. The following days were strange. Simple interactions, mealtime, small talk, even a casual joke carried weight. I found myself overthinking everything, replaying that moment again and again in my mind. I realized that sometimes an unexpected situation doesn't just create a single awkward memory, it shifts the dynamics even subtly and the house feels different. One night, my mom called me into the living room. Her voice was calm, but carried an undertone I couldn't quite place. She spoke gently about how difficult things had been since my dad's passing, about the loneliness she sometimes felt, and how she hoped we could lean on each other more. I listened, realizing that the tension in the house wasn't just about my embarrassment. It was about all of us, about grief, adjustment, and unspoken feelings. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice small shifts. Conversations became easier. Laughter returned to rooms that had been quiet. My sister and I teased each other like we used to. But more carefully, more thoughtfully. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was conscious, a deliberate effort to reconnect, to rebuild the bond that had always been there before the accident of timing had thrown us into a weird situation. In hindsight, I realized that the most uncomfortable moments sometimes force growth. That single day, awkward, panicked, and embarrassing, became a catalyst for change. It reminded me of the importance of communication, of empathy, and of the delicate balance that exists in relationships. What seemed mortifying at the time ultimately helped us see each other more clearly with patience and understanding. Life, I've learned, is full of moments like this, moments where you feel completely exposed, unprepared, and vulnerable. But it's often these very moments that push us to grow, to notice things we otherwise might have ignored. The silence that followed my mistake wasn't empty. It was full of lessons, full of opportunities to repair, reconnect, and rebuild. Now the house feels lighter, filled with laughter again. That day is still a memory that makes me cringe. But it also reminds me that awkwardness fades, but understanding, empathy, and connection last. And sometimes it takes one uncomfortable moment to appreciate just how strong those bonds really are. A few days after that conversation with my mom, I started noticing small, subtle changes in my sister. It wasn't dramatic, but enough for me to sense a difference. She would smile at me more often, linger in the room just a little longer than usual, and sometimes she'd bring me snacks or little notes saying, "I thought you might like this." At first, I thought I was imagining it, but over time, the pattern became undeniable. I realized that our relationship had entered a new phase. The awkwardness of that day hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. What could have been a source of tension became a bridge, opening conversations and moments we hadn't shared in years. We started talking more about school, friends, and even silly little secrets we hadn't told anyone else. It felt like a renewal, a fragile yet promising reconnection. One afternoon, I found myself thinking about my dad. Losing him had left a hole in the house, a quiet void that we had all tried to fill in different ways. My mom worked tirelessly to keep everything together. My sister immersed herself in her own world. And I often buried myself in school or games. That single awkward moment had reminded me that despite the silence, the love was still there. It just needed to be noticed, nurtured, and acknowledged. I started making a conscious effort to spend more time with them. Small gestures, helping my mom with chores, sitting down with my sister to talk about her day, or even just sharing a meal together without distractions. And slowly, the house began to feel alive again. The quiet corners were filled with laughter and conversation, and the tension that had hovered after that day seemed to lift, replaced by a feeling of genuine connection. Yet, there were moments when the memory of that day would sneak back in. Not in a harmful way, but as a reminder of how easily things could feel out of control. It made me more aware of my actions, more conscious of the space we shared. I learned to anticipate feelings, to respect boundaries, and to communicate openly, lessons I hadn't fully appreciated before. Then, something unexpected happened. One evening, my sister came to my room while I was studying. She didn't say much at first, just handed me a notebook and smiled. Inside were pages filled with sketches, doodles, and short notes about our family memories. There were drawings of our old living room, our cat, even the silly inside jokes we'd shared over the years. I felt a lump in my throat. It was her way of reconnecting, of showing that despite everything, we were still a family. We spent that evening talking, laughing, and reminiscing. The tension of the past week melted away completely. I realized something crucial. Awkward moments, mistakes, and misunderstandings aren't the end of a relationship. They're opportunities to grow closer, to understand one another better, and to rebuild bonds that we sometimes take for granted. From that point on, our family dynamic changed subtly but meaningfully. We became more patient with each other, more understanding. We didn't need to force laughter or conversation. It came naturally. That one day, which had felt mortifying at the time, became a turning point. It reminded us that life is unpredictable. Relationships can be fragile, but love and connection are resilient if nurtured. Sometimes I think back to that ordinary afternoon and marvel at how one small awkward moment could lead to so much growth. Life has a strange way of teaching lessons, not always the ones we expect, but the ones we need. And though the memory of that day still makes me cringe, it also reminds me that vulnerability, honesty, and family are worth more than pride or embarrassment. As I sit here today reflecting on the past weeks, I realize that what matters most isn't the awkwardness, the embarrassment, or the mistakes. It's the connections we maintain, the patience we show, and the effort we put into understanding one another. That day may have started as just another ordinary afternoon, but it ended up shaping how I see my family and myself.